Welcome to Greendale People's Church, a place in which all people are welcome to worship God freely. The Allen family has experienced more loss than they need this year, and we will proceed in grace. Bruce Allen and his family have been a very important part of our church for decades, and Bruce's life was important in our community. So we are sad at his passing. In light of that, we will spend time today in worship, celebrating the life of a good man, beloved by his family. At the conclusion of today's service, Bruce's family would like you to join them at a reception downstairs in Fisher Hall. And of course, all are welcome. Please join me this afternoon as we open with the prayer that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Psalm 23, and it is often read at services such as this because it is of great comfort. So if you do know it, please do feel free to say it along with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Amen. In your pews, you'll find green hymnals, and we're going to sing our first hymn today, Be Still My Soul, number 451. All those who care to, please stand. Still Please be seated.
Thank you all for coming today. This is a day that I haven't been looking forward to. Many of you, I'm sure, feel the same. It's, in a New England terminology, wicked hard to stand up here and just to try to encapsulate something of the person that you have known for his whole life, 62 years, which at one time would have seemed like a lot of years. Doesn't seem like a lot of years to me now. But at any rate, I'm going to attempt to try to put just a little bit of a cloud around the person that most of us knew in some form or another. And I know that I look out and I saw people coming in and talk to people. There's so many of you that were part of Bruce's life at so many various points. From our early ages, when we were little kids, to growing up in the young adult years, and then from those times to times when we all grew apart and moved to different parts of the country and found it harder to be together and stay together. And yet, at the bottom of it all, there remained that attachment and that love that was below the surface for some because we didn't get a chance to express it much. But on the other hand, it was always there. The last few years have been a great lesson to me on life. But I would like to just kind of sum up. Most of you knew Bruce at different points in his life, so you probably didn't know a lot of stuff about the early age. Bruce was born in 1953, and at the time things were a lot different than today. I know my grandkids wouldn't recognize the world without video equipment and games to play, as most of your kids would either, but it was a very different time. Families did a lot more together. We spent a lot more time together. We were involved. This church was the epicenter for my family for a number of years, for my parents their whole lives, for my brother, my sister, and I somewhat less, and me being the one in the family that had 1 foot in their generation and 1 foot in the next generation. I probably was more active in the church in the early days than my brother and sister, but we were all part of this church, and anything that happened here was part of our lives. I better put my glasses on or I'm going to be reading you somebody else's stuff. We lived at our early years from Worcester. My parents grew up in the Greendale area, and it was our home. This was our neighborhood. This was where we came. This was what we did. But we had a lot of exciting things that we shared. And Bruce's personality started forming very early. He was definitely the rebel of the family. He definitely did things his way, and if he didn't like the way he was asked to do it, he would agree with my mother and father and say, "Yep, you're right about that," and then he'd go do it his way anyway. But I found out I was in awe of that because for some unknown reason, he was able to stay out of trouble with them all the time, and I was always the one that got time out, you know? They didn't call it that then, but it was me because I would challenge the authority and find out that I should have just been quiet. When we were very young kids, we lived in Shrewsbury for a while, for about 4 years. In the early years of our school, I was there first through fourth, and of course, Bruce being 4 years younger than me, hadn't started school yet. But we got to live in a neighborhood environment and mingle with the kids and learn how to do things and have some fun and raise a little heck. And sometime during those years, just before we moved there, from in the early 50s to the mid to late 50s, we had a life-changing experience for Bruce and eventually Gail and I, was that our grandparents, my father's parents, made the unthinkable move of putting all their stuff in the back of a brand new 1953 Dodge and driving to California to move. I mean, up to that point, nobody in our family went anywhere. I mean, you lived in New England. My father's uncle and his family, they went to New Hampshire, and we thought that was a major trip. You know, so it was a big thing for us to get in a car and drive across the country. And I recently came across a little handwritten diary that my mother had written, and she put it in an envelope and said, "For the Allen children." And I said, "Oh, this would be really interesting." So my wife Pat found it for me, and you might want to read this. And I got all excited. Wow, this should be really an insight into family history. And I read it, and it was a day-by-day thing of us driving across country. and stopping at some tourist cabins, and the places with, those places with the neon signs that crackle, that was the kind of place, that was the big fancy trip. We stayed in log cabins and places that today you'd have a security guard, but it was pretty wild stuff for young kids then. And so I'm really getting into this reading until I get to the end. I get to the end, and the last paragraph said, well, Howie and I really enjoyed this trip. We probably would have seen more if we didn't have the kids with us. I said, okay, well, that pretty much sums it up, and I'm guessing that says the whole thing. So those were kind of the early years. Well, we had intended to live in California, but my grandfather passed away. My mother used that opportunity to say, all my family's back in Massachusetts, and maybe I really don't want to move out to California. So we all came back. Well, this is when Bruce's and my life kind of started running parallels together, and we got to start to grow up together. And we lived for a few years in Shrewsbury, and Bruce had more trips to the emergency rooms of more hospitals over those years than I can possibly tell you. And we all know somebody in our family or some neighbor or friend who just can't resist falling down and getting hurt. And, I was almost feeling guilty because I made it through high school without stitches. And this little kid would fall down. We used to play in the back of the Lundgren and Janitis Dairy. And we'd run around the back and ride our bicycles around through the backyard. And when we found an open door, that was really cool because we rode our bikes through the dairy when nobody was there. We thought we were pretty tough, we were tough hombres in those days. But that all was good until he slid his bicycle into a pile of broken bottles that were being swept up on the side of the road, and he had stitches from his elbow to his wrist, and we lost our playground after that. But it was now at the time when he was getting his personality that kind of stayed with him the rest of the time. Friendly, lovable, good kid to play with and have a good time, but still he did his own thing to his own drum. And that's not such a bad thing when you think about it. In fact, now that I look back, I'm probably a little jealous. I wish I'd done some more of that myself, but I would have gotten caught, but he didn't. Anyway, we moved to Westboro, and that's when our real roots, permanent roots, were sunk into the ground. And Westboro, even though I lived there till I guess I was about 22 from the time I was 10, and it felt like home, and we really grew up in that community. And the friends that Bruce and I made at that time have stayed with us through all these years, and there's no stronger friendship than those friendships that were made at that level. And Bruce got into his early years. I just have to tell you, man, everybody in my family's heard this, but this was like the family lore. My mother told this story over and over again, just a little thing. Bruce wasn't all sure he wanted to start his first day of real school. And we had two little schools, one of which where my sister Gail works is Eli Whitney School in Westboro, and there was a little building behind it, was the Armstrong School. And Bruce was supposed to go there for his first day of school. So my mother dutifully takes him to school and walks up, and we were within walking distance. He goes to school, she comes home, she was teaching at our house. Of course, we had the nursery and dance school. My mother was teaching, and everything was going fine. And all of a sudden, Bruce shows up about 10 past 12. And she says, Bruce, what are you doing home? I'm not going back to school. Well, what do you mean you're not going to go back to school? No, I'm just not going to go. Well, why? What's wrong? They're giving us high school work. Now, how a kid in his first day of first grade would know what high school work was to begin with is beyond me. But that was Bruce. And it took some, some convincing and maybe some cajoling at that point or something to get him back to school, but he eventually did. And it was kind of the way he went through school, now that I think about it. I used to get in trouble from goofing off academically, but he would get in trouble for having fun. And I think he got the best of the deal. One time in high school, Bruce was a little wild, and he was in a group. He was in a group, and he had some friends that know some of this stuff. But he went to a dance. I guess it was a junior prom or something, and he borrowed my father's old Volkswagen Beetle. And the guys all decided to go out and have some fun afterwards. And I don't know what they did, and I wouldn't cast any aspersions on whatever they did. But as he started home down East Main Street in Westboro, he decided at the last minute to make a right turn into Water Street, to a slight angle on the right. He cut the wheel and found out that all that stuff they said about Volkswagens handling badly at speed were true. That Volkswagen rolled over on its roof, and like a turtle on a shell, slid down the road down Water Street for a while and came to a stop. So he gets out of the car, and of course there were no cell phones, there's nobody you could call back then, so somebody had seen it, and one of his friends came and helped him, and they rocked the car and flipped it back over on its wheels, and here you had this Volkswagen with a completely flattened roof, and Bruce wasn't a little guy, even then, he wasn't as big as he was at the end of his life, but here he is squished down with just his head showing, and he made it to the gas station where he was working part-time after school. And now, see, to me, my problem at that point was, how am I going to tell my parents about this? Oh, man, that never bothered Bruce. He got a presentation all ready for him before he got home. He had located somebody else with another Volkswagen that didn't run, and he talked the guy into giving him the Volkswagen, so he took the whole body off the Volkswagen and swapped it to told my father, don't worry about it, Dad, I got another body, it's going to be fine. You know, you gotta admire somebody who can think that fast. I mean, I might have been thinking of doing the OJ at that time, you know, getting in the back of a car and riding around till I figured out an answer for it. But that was his way. We hit the 70s, not age-wise. We hit the 70s and we became what we thought were adults. And during those younger years leading up to that, and again, I see a lot of faces here from that were around in those times and knew this. Because our mother was a dance teacher, we had no choice but to get involved with some of that. And to take the lesser of the evils, if you didn't want to be a tap dancer as a preteen, then the only thing you could do was try to get involved in the ballroom dancing side. That, at that time, still had some, it was okay. People didn't think you were too strange if you ballroom danced, so that's what we did. And Bruce got involved with the competitive dancing. I did a little bit. It wasn't my finest hour. Bruce, on the other hand, happened to have a very good partner who kept his attention focused on doing what they were supposed to do, and they did quite well. And we had a lot of good times, a lot of groups down to Boston, to the, what was the Hotel Bradford, I think, wasn't it, Jerry? I think that's where we went. We went down a few times. We thought we were cute. When I got past that step, we got to do the stuff like bring the rubber vomit and throw it on the floor and see if we could make somebody scream. But Bruce did the right thing. He did his dancing, but he also stayed a little wilder on the sides than some of us and had some good times. And we made it to the point where we started our own families. The 70s were an interesting time. Some of you've read about the 70s, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, I lived them. But at any rate, this is when both of our lives changed, but Bruce kind of and I communicated in a way as brothers that you don't communicate with generally with friends. And I had gotten involved, I became totally enamored with police dogs. And I was a policeman. I started in 1973, and in 1975, I was able to talk to the police chief in Westboro, who wasn't an easy guy to talk to, as some people in this room know. I told him what a great idea it would be if Westboro got a police dog. And he looked at me kind of funny, and he said, well, what would we do with a police dog? And I said, well, you always used in those days, you always used the argument about tracking lost children. We'd find a lost child. If a child got lost, we could track him and find him. Oh, that's okay. But our police chief at the time was one of those guys that liked good PR. He liked to be looked at fondly or in awe by the other police chiefs around. So he thought it'd be cool to have a police dog. And one of my former sergeants is in this room, and he will tell you that I got so many calls out of town because I was the only police dog handler at that time. Bruce was helping me work the dog every night. We'd go out and train, do a few things on the side, and make sure the dog was sharp and ready to work. I had more calls out of town that we were answering calls as far away as the New Hampshire line and the Rhode Island line. So I'd go to work on a regular shift, and I'd have to hear it from the sergeant and the other guys. Oh, what, are you making a personal appearance tonight? Hey, did you come to visit? You know, where's your brother? He's here somewhere too, isn't he? Well, he was there somewhere, and he got more interested in the dogs, and both of us changed our lives from that point on. And Bruce became much more of the true dedicated dog lover than I did. My view was a little different than his. In his mind, it was about the dog and getting the most out of that dog and having that relationship, the kind of relationship that we all feel for pets when we love a dog. But Bruce sincerely believed that the dog was an extension of that person, and that dog deserved every bit of respect and care and love that another person would in that same situation. I, on the other hand, was a little too shallow, because to me, the dog was, for me, a tool. Just like a policeman has a flashlight, and a policeman has a ticket book, and a policeman has a gun, well, temporarily, they'll probably take them away soon, but they will have something to work with, and that's what they do with that. And I tried to treat it that way and not get attached. Bruce didn't see it that way. And, you know, and there's some gentlemen in this room that go back to that era with canine with us, and they'll tell you it was a very personal thing for people with their dogs. And I mean, if you remember, our canine region got involved with a canine pet cemetery so that we could have places to bury the dogs when they died or were killed in the line of duty or something like that. And people like me poo-pooed that, like that was over-emotional, that, you know, that's crazy, until my first dog died. Then I wasn't poo-pooing anymore. But guys like Bruce, they understood that, and they reached out, and they tried to, they felt that. And they would go sit with guys that had to have their dogs put to sleep because they were ill or injured or hurt. They would sit there on the floor with them while that dog passed. And there aren't a lot, it was a different world. My world was just divided on the professional line, but Bruce had the humanity added to it that a lot of guys didn't. And I have to say that was a lesson that I didn't appreciate necessarily early on, because I just didn't think it was how things were. Now I know he was right. And we have to be that way. We have to be that way with all things in our lives, and any living, breathing being is important. So Bruce's interest in the dogs grew from that point on, and he was not a full-time police officer. He was a part-time police officer in Westboro, and then became a part-time police officer in Shrewsbury. And I just will tell you the story of how he got started. When you get downstairs, you'll see some pictures of a little flop-eared dog that looks marked like a German Shepherd, but it's got little ears falling over. That dog's name was Snuff, short for Snuffleupagus. And that dog was the dog for Bruce's kids. And that dog was loved dearly by everybody in the family. But that dog was unfulfilled in his life. And he used to come to our training sessions when in fact, I think it was when we were doing one of your class, Jerry, when we were at Grafton, and one day the dog jumped out of the back of the car and started running across the lot. Oh, by the way, Bruce was instrumental in helping us get the Grafton State Hospital, a former mental institution that was empty. What a perfect place for policemen. I mean, this was the great place to go. I mean, like, we couldn't offend anybody, you know, we could, anyway. So we've got this little dog in the back of the car, and nobody's paying attention. We got done, we had all our hurdles and our climbs and our exercise thing. Bruce's dog comes flying out of the back of the car. We're all looking at it. Somebody yells, "Loose dog!" So we're turning around. Oh no, somebody's gonna get dog bit. We turn around, it's this little dog, and he starts going over the jumps by himself. Each one of the jumps goes through the window jump, and then struggles to try to start climbing up the ladder to one of the other exercises. He'd never been there. Nobody had ever tried to do that with him. He just decided that was what he was going to do and what he wanted to do. During that time period, Bruce's son Jason came to a lot of our training. Then he didn't have any choice. He probably wouldn't have come if he had his choice. But those are the days when things were so much. It wasn't as organized. Anything we did with police dogs, for most of us that weren't with big cities, had to be done voluntarily on your own time. Bruce always put his time in, always included anybody that wanted to come and see could do it, and he would always give them time for whatever they wanted. And that was when his love for the canine stuff really started to make important. This is the same time that he and his family began, and he had 2 children. He had a daughter, Terry, and a son, Jason. And during those years, those kids were growing up, and they kind of got, just like my daughter, Melissa, got stuck in the middle of all this dog stuff, whether they wanted to or not. Every police dog trial we'd travel to would bring T-shirts back, because if we wanted T-shirts, everybody must want T-shirts. Until one time I went to say goodbye to my daughter, and she said, "Dad, please, whatever you do, no more T-shirts." I guess they ran out of a German Shepherd dog head on your shirt as being the way they wanted to dress. Would that be accurate? So those years were probably the most interesting and certainly the most formative for Bruce in his love that went the rest of his life to his last day. When we started, we were fortunate enough to get the Grafton training area, and we were able to help other people do it. Nobody got paid for any of that. And during that time period, I started work myself as the coordinator for the training council in Massachusetts. but had to have a spinal fusion and was forced to retire. When I retired, Bruce took over my job as the training coordinator and became someone who worked a full-time job and then did 6 or 8 hours helping other people try to train their dogs. And that love was just something that you don't do that if most people wouldn't do it without getting paid. Let's just put it that way. And today, probably nobody. But back then, things were a little different. So he really got into it. My wife and daughter and I moved to Florida, and shortly after that, Bruce followed down, and Bruce and Kathy, his girlfriend, is sitting here with my wife, Pat, moved to Florida and became police dog trainers down there. He spent his first assignment was doing a training class for the Polk County Sheriff's Office in Lakeland, Florida. And after that, he moved to Miami, and he and Kathy became the managers of a very large kennel, 200 or 300 dog kennel, wasn't it, Kathy? Very big kennel down there that involved private work as well as police dog work, and things just grew in his life. I was fortunate enough to do the same line of work, and this is where, even though Bruce and I have been close as brothers through our whole lives, it changed through the professional end of this because we shared a love of something. His view of it was different than mine, but both of us, I think we complemented one another and we became closer as we were able to do those things. After our daughter decided to go to college in Massachusetts, and we were living in Florida, I started to scratch my head and say, I'm the one that wanted to move back north, and she's already gone, and where is she? She's back home where all our friends and family are, so we decided to uproot and come back, and eventually we ended up back here in Massachusetts, and Bruce ended up on Long Island. And Bruce ran a kennel there, boarding facility and training kennel, it was in Medford, I believe, right? Medford. It was owned by a police officer from Long Island, from Suffolk County, a canine handler, and he continued his work. And I came back here, retiring in the mid '90s, early '90s, and moving back here in '94. And I thought it was time for me to move on from the dogs and do something else. I still hadn't figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I got into some other things and started some businesses, and when Bruce came back, he also came back doing other type of business. His work on Long Island and in Massachusetts when he came back was in a big commercial greenhouse environment where he was a manager of quite a few people working, and I think it was Cavecchio's in Sudbury where he worked. And about that time, 9/11 came, and it affected all of us that had any touch to the law enforcement world. And I was approached by some very significantly wealthy guys, I guess, who wanted to do their share to help in the terrorism fight. And they wanted to know if we could start a training system for bomb detection dogs. And so I did that, and I went to Bruce and asked him if he'd be interested in running the kennel. We were going to build a kennel in just over the line in Connecticut, at Woodstock, Connecticut. And he absolutely was interested in doing it. And we were able to put it together, and he had thank goodness he showed up, because one of my first assignments was supposed to be to get a kennel built, and I wouldn't even know where to start. And one thing about Bruce, and it's turned out he's passed it on through his son, that there are certain people that can do things with their hands and not have it look bad. I'm just not one of those guys. So Bruce came in and took over that program and built the kennels and got our business going. And just to tell you that's such long-reaching fingers from that type of work, because we worked all over the world. We had dog teams in Afghanistan, and a few not teams, but dogs in Iraq. And some of our people, some actually former policemen from Massachusetts, worked for us and worked overseas. And Bruce and I got very, very close, working together daily again. And all those petty things we used to jab each other with growing up all seemed to go away. They didn't seem to be so important anymore. And we really got the chance, the last 8 to 10 years of Bruce's life and my time with him were an unbelievable gift, because I learned so much. I got so much from him. He gave out more than he got, I think. We tried, all of his family, all of us. Just can never forget the day when he asked me to meet him and go to lunch one day down in Worcester. And I met him, and we went to lunch, and he casually told me that he'd been diagnosed with a form of untreatable cancer. And when somebody tells you something like that, even if it was just somebody you knew lightly, that would kind of shake you a little bit because, I mean, this didn't look like there was anything wrong with this guy, even though we knew he had some respiratory infections and sickness, and we just weren't ready to hear that. And I certainly wasn't ready, and it's still surreal to me now to think of that. But that was 6 years ago. From that day forward, things changed in our relationship. It wasn't anything up front. It wasn't anything you thought about. It wasn't anything you asked to do. He never asked for anything that was unreasonable. He never complained to me. Now, Kathy might have heard plenty of it, but I didn't hear any of the complaining. And even right up through his worst, weakest times, he still all he wanted to talk about, he'd ask me to bring him, we shared an interest in old cars and classic cars. He was a NASCAR devotee. I don't know NASCAR other than I know how you spell it. That's the only thing I know about it, so I really couldn't share that with him. But we did share love for motorcycles. We used to race motorcycles together. In that time period, we started changing what we did and how we communicated with one another. But it didn't mean that the relationship got less. It got much deeper, and it got much more, I depended on him as much as he depended on me. And that was such a gift. It was a gift to our family in some ways, because we started doing things like a Sunday morning breakfast. We didn't do it every Sunday, but we had 14, 15, sometimes 20 people would meet together for breakfast somewhere on one of those high dollar 5-star places like Denny's. And we'd just visit. We'd have breakfast and do that. We wouldn't have necessarily done that if everybody hadn't gravitated back to Massachusetts, back to New England, and felt that bond getting stronger. So when my parents were alive, that was important to them to do that. After my mother passed away last year in February, I thought the thing might just kind of peter out. But thanks to Kathy and the rest of the family members, we didn't let that happen. We still tried to do that. We don't do it as often, but it means just as much when we get to do that. We get to spend that time, even if it's just an hour together, and just to let everybody know we're still there and we love them. We don't shake hands anymore. We hug. You know what? When I was a little kid, I don't remember my grandparents hugging me, my grandfathers. It wasn't as much touching and close, touchy-feely stuff. And even my own father. I was married and probably had my daughter after she was born before my father stopped stiffening up if I tried to give him a hug. It wasn't the world they came from. So that's not the same anymore. Now, I see my friends that have grandkids, they're on the floor rolling around playing with the kids. I mean, that just was unthought of before. So that was just a symptom, I think, of an evolution in relationships between families. And that's what we felt with Bruce. Bruce gave us that. But this last couple of years, as he started to fail, it hit a new level with me. Because I never got up any morning without thinking about what can I do, what can we do together today? What can we do to share? Not what can I do for him, but what can we do for each other? How can we spend time that is, any time was enjoyable. If it was just sitting there with him, he loved the Western channel. He didn't care about any other 4,000 cable TV channels. All he wanted was the Western channel. I think he knew every lyric for every Randolph Scott movie there ever was. That was what he did. Poor Kathy would come home after work and go, oh no, not again, the Western channel. But I expected it when I went there because I knew that's what he liked to watch. It was just, we learned things about each other. He didn't demand anything. He didn't ask for anything. He never complained. There was no whining. It makes me ashamed of myself when I think of all the stuff I've whined about after watching what he did. And the last week we had with him, I never once in my life ever imagined under the worst or best circumstances that I would be sitting at his bedside when he passed away. And that's what happened. And that was a moment that I'll never forget, because it didn't end anything. It shifted the gears and put the responsibility now to me. Now it's my responsibility to never forget who he was and what he was. And I can't let that happen. So if I have one overall summary, couple of words, I guess, for Bruce is absolute love, absolute understanding. And he said to both my sister and I from his hospital bed, all he said to us was just think of me, please think of me. And the tears would run down his face. And you know, you think he's not with it some days. And the last day that I was able to talk to him, I sat there and I went in and told him, Bruce, I'm going to get down to Rhode Island and pick up your grandson. He's getting out on Christmas break. And Bruce nodded his head and smiled, and I said, I knew when the tears came that he was thinking in his mind that that was something he would dearly love to be doing, that he wanted more than anything else, because his love for his grandkids and his kids, Bruce wasn't a wordsmith. He was somebody, but you read the emotion. And that emotion was there. So that day, when I told him at 1:45 in the afternoon, I have to leave about 2:30, and then we did some stuff, and I went out and talked to the nurses. About 15 past or 20 past, I came back, and he's trying to tell me something. And he's trying to speak to me, and he's going, don't forget this. And I couldn't hear him. So after you ask somebody to repeat something several times, you're the idiot in the room now, So I tried to get him, I went down close. What is it you're saying? He said, don't forget, don't be late. And he said, your time. And I looked up at the clock, and it dawned on me. From 45 minutes before, we'd had the discussion that I had to leave to go get his grandson. He was telling me, don't be late to get my grandson. He was there. He was there. So it was just so much love, so much caring in somebody that just lost the ability to be able to physically do it and share it, but you knew it was there. I would caution in anybody to don't miss any time with any relative, any friend, anybody that you're close to. Don't brush it off and say, I'll have time for him some other day. You make that time. You go see him. You talk to him. You hold their hand. Because you won't be able to do it forever. And I'd just like to close with just a short poem that I came across, and trying to make myself feel better. Isn't that funny? You lose somebody, and then you spend all the time feeling sorry for yourself. Well, I had plenty of that. God saw you getting tired when a cure was not to be. So he wrapped his arms around you and whispered, come to me. You didn't deserve what you went through. So he gave you your rest. God broke our hearts to prove to us he only takes the best. And when I saw you sleeping, so peaceful and free from pain, I could not wish you back to suffer all of that again. Thank you. I'm supposed to do this. I asked if we could use a song, a recording of a song that I found particularly meaningful with the lyrics, and the lyrics are on your program, and it's Go Rest High on the Mountain, and I'm going to ask that we play that now, and this is for you, Bruce.
The Rainbow Bridge. There is a bridge connecting heaven and earth. It is called the Rainbow Bridge because of its many colors. Just this side of the Rainbow Bridge, there is a land of meadows, hills, and valleys with lush green grass. When a beloved pet dies, the pet goes to this place. There is always food and water and warm spring weather. Those old and frail animals are young again. Those who have been maimed are made whole again. They play all day with each other. But there is only one thing missing.
They are not with their special person who loved them on earth. So each day they run and play until the day comes when suddenly one stops playing and looks up. The nose twitches, the ears are up, the eyes are staring, and this one suddenly runs from the group. You have been seen, and when you and your special friend meet, you take him and her into your arms and embrace. Your face is kissed again and again. You look once more into the eyes of your trusting pet. Then you cross the Rainbow Bridge together, never to be separated.
Before we sing the first verse of our final hymn, wanted to invite anyone who would care to come up and share something about Bruce that they would like to reflect on.
My name is Cam Hutt. I am a husband of Bruce's cousin Karen, the son-in-law of his aunt Betty, and the D+ student of his mother. We have gathered here too many times and too often, and we need to agree as a group to stop doing that. Ronnie needs a break. I'm the third of 4 children, and as my mother would tell you, as a third child, I learned from my 2 older brothers that I should maybe step back, step outside, and from the outside watch what they did. If they got themselves in trouble, then I could say to myself, well, I'm not going to do that. And if they were having a good time, then I could join them. So I learned to be an observer. A little bit on the outside, but an observer. And I probably did not know Bruce as well as I could have. But I did stand a little bit on the outside and I observed. And I learned something about him and about human nature that is probably very important. Because I learned in the last several years of his life about the amazing ability a human being can have to persevere and to press through and to do really for others what we would not necessarily even think about doing. He endured things in the treatment of his condition. It got past doing it for himself. He was doing it for other people, that what was learned from his case might help someone else in the future. And that's an amazing, amazing trait. It's an amazing thing to do. And I hope that if I ever find myself in that kind of situation, having observed this amazing man, that I could do the same thing. Thank you.
Please feel free to stay seated, and we are going to sing one verse of Amazing Grace, which you'll find in your hymnal on page 422, and then we will be joined by bagpipe. Be still our souls as we bid our friend and brother farewell for now. Go in peace, for you are surely loved. In the name of the Creator, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.